morning. We need to wake up because we all come from a different part of the world, and some have been here by distance. Some of them are very nearby, but not always be here on time because of traffic and many things. But let me start. Professor Harry Shah, founding chairman of the International Advisory Board, Institute of Catastrophe Risk Management at Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. The members of the ICIMIAB, Mr. Malcolm Sango, Mr. Rowan Douglas, and Henry Law. Distinguished speakers, delegates, and guests, and many of my NTU colleagues and students around the room, ladies and gentlemen. As always, it's a pleasure to be here to welcome you on behalf of the university and the institute to this year's symposium, the 9th International Symposium on Catastrophe Risk Management. When I was counting on it, I just realized how fast time flies, and we are on the 9th. And the themes of today's gathering will be closing the protection gaps. We should be addressing the challenges and opportunities. And to many of our guests who have come from overseas, because we'd like to welcome you to Singapore. It's high temperature, but not extremely warm compared with many cities that are new to you. Warm welcome to you. And as a tradition, usually when we start this symposium, you look around the world around us each year when we start. In the year 2017, last year, seemed to be the largest among of insured losses. And in 2011, the market itself witnessed a record high natural catastrophe loss of US dollar 120 billion. Then, since then, I found a statistic which I read from Willis Reed's 2017 report on natural catastrophe losses. The market has witnessed a trend in loss reduction until last year, 2017, when the net cat loss has increased, reversed the correction to 143 billion US dollars. Primarily resulted from the three major hurricanes, Harvey, Irma, and Mary. So this year, as we start a year, because there was a earthquake, with an unfortunate loss in Taiwan, the Hualien earthquake, in February. It seemed to be a year of very active disaster year. Even today, as I was coming back from California 2 days ago, the ongoing massive forest fires in California. And some friends say devastating droughts in Australia. And there are heat waves really around the world that have been making record-breaking high temperatures. And just 2 days ago, unfortunately in Lombok, Indonesia, our friends were struck by a major earthquake. The rescue efforts ongoing. It is against this constant emerging risk and ever-increasing losses that we try to define what should be the theme of every year's symposiums. So we have to anticipate that and try to capture that. So with all those efforts, since January 2010, ICIM has held 8 previous symposia on catastrophe risk management. And if you look down the poster that we've been put up, including the recent one, you see we started in 2010 on addressing, and that's our key themes when ICIM was founded, public-private partnership, and raise awareness, doing the understanding and communications with the help to manage the catastrophes. So that has remained the underlying themes of our symposium, our research work. It's one of the rare places we see large amount of industry presence coupled with academic research. Then we went on to look at 2011 and 2012 on climate change. At the point in time, the address was focused on food and water security in 2011. It was around the time when Tohoku earthquake was devastating, especially the Japanese economy. And we're looking at 2012 black swan events around Asia and Southeast Asia. In 2013 and 14, we began to look at the evolving risk of extreme events in Asia Pacific, with those events behind us, the tsunami earthquake, Thai floods, and of course the tidal hurricanes loss. Then the question coming will be the financing of natural catastrophe in Asia. So we held that in 2014. Then it became clear that through those discussions, mega cities with the high exposure and concentration exposure will be the key assets we need to protect. So in 2015, we're looking at mega cities of Asia and evolving risks. But the question was, are these risks manageable as a city? Many of us, of course, are thinking, sharing the idea that cities actually are perfect size for risk management. And all of those discussions in just 2016 and last year, 2017, that we are focused on the lack of data and high quality data itself. So we have the 2016 unplugging the natural catastrophe data gap, and from thoughts to actions. That's when we put a proposal which got approved in 2017 called the Natural Catastrophe Data Analytics Exchange Platform. So that's ongoing, and with that theme, last year we're trying to discuss how risk and resilience can be managed, and natural catastrophe data, and how we can make best use of that. How do we describe exposure and losses? So those are the sketch of how the thoughts has evolved from 2010 to today. So we are looking at a ninth symposium about protection gaps, which has been described in many instances. So the theme reflects what ICRM's current endeavors, together with the finance industry, both insurance, reinsurance, and brokers, supported by MS, the government encouragement. And in doing this, with the main theme, while we're discussing the main theme, we have structured them into three subthemes. So if you look at the pointers, you see that we should be listening after the opening sessions along the direction of area ones, reducing the protection gaps, but by looking at cross-national views. Then we look at, on the second items, risk poolings, we'll be looking at through regional views. We hope learn what has been done and what has been learned. Then finally, in the afternoon session, we'll be looking at enabling parametric risk transfer solutions. That's part of a systematic effort that we've been developing technology in the university, working with the industry to support the endeavor and ambitions of Singapore in creating the alternative risk transfer in that process. But as we discuss protection gaps throughout the day today, I hope that we will understand better the causes of the gaps. We hope that better understanding of the causes will enable us to identify the characteristic of the gaps, which then should include not only the financial and economic factors, but we believe it should also include cultural and environmental factors when we look into protection gap that may be represented by penetrations or by densities of insurance in Asia Pacific particularly. So with a clear understanding of causes and characteristics of the protection gaps, it is then possible we can attempt to close the protection gap with hope to incorporate technology and evolving the government. Using the technology as a tool, so far we see and heard and learn from our colleagues, it could help bridge the gaps by reducing the cost on the front end on underwritings backends on the cranes. Then involving the government as a partner will be able to increase the product's affordabilities through providing public subsidies to low-income groups. So that will be the themes of today's general knowledge as well as the technical discussions. So let me come back to the report about ICIM's R&D work. Some of you, if you have flipped through the binders, you see that we have reduced the program from 2 days, which we usually run, first time this year, to only 1 day. And by doing that, then we are running out of time to really share with you the current development projects and progress of research work. So we have put up 12 posters behind you at the entrance area. Their work, ongoing, current, supporting our ongoing research project, like NECADEX initiative, our Pearl River Delta risk assessment projects, and our efforts by many PhD students, research fellows, research associates on the development of urban expansion theory, with an intention to address what will be the future loss that involve dynamic natures of losses in natural catastrophe as exposure increases in time. So that you will see the 12 posters will be grouped into first the NECADEX database, this is intermediate outputs, and you see the urban expansion theories work, and you see some hazards and loss estimate. So I do want to encourage you as you walk by, talk to our PhD students, our research fellows, and research associates. They are excited. I'm sure they'll be excited with the work that's ongoing there. And as I look across the hall, I see many familiar faces. And this room, as I said, that has a special meaning, is very important, because ICIM held its first symposium in this particular, in January 2010. And the first symposium then, with Professor Shah's input and all the work that we had, we actually had a very fabulous dinner at Istana, hosted by Singapore President, the late President S.R. So it's come a long way, and ICIM was launched on the same event, January 2010, by the then Managing Director of MAS, Mr. Ying Sui, who is now the Finance Minister of Singapore. So there are many memories as we gather here in this room. And since then, since January 2010, the Institute has been very fortunate. We have received sufficient encouragement from government funding, from industry funding, from the joint support that we have from international collaborators. So our R&D activity in catastrophe risk management has been ongoing in a relatively fast pace. So I want to take this opportunity here while I'm thinking about ICIM to thank Professor Harald Shah. He's our founding chairman of our International Advisory Board, ICIM, as I said. And he has helped over the last many years to shape the ICIM's strategic directions. He's guided ICIM's development. So all the success and achievements that you may have seen today that displayed by ICIM is largely to his credit. Actually, Professor Shah, to me personally, is more than chairman of the advisory board. He has been my mentor for the last 20-some years for not just academic research, but university administrations. And I know some of you knew me earlier. If not for Professor Shah's persuasions, I would not have taken on the Dean of Engineering job at NTU. It was a tremendous challenge. I had to be responsible for 500 professors, 1,000 staff, 16,000 students, 6 years ago. So as we are gathering here in this very special ballroom, I also want to let you know today is an even more special day. today is Professor Shah's birthday. Many, many more returns, Paresh. I won't tell anyone your age. You're still young. Too young to be mentioned, yeah. So now with that personalized tribute to Professor Shah, he's been a key component supporting ICIM development together with the support we have received from IA board. The only thing left for me to do is to thank you all for joining us at the ninth symposium to discuss closing the protection gap challenges and opportunities. So I wish all of you a very fruitful time at the symposium. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was Executive Director, ICRM, NTU Singapore, Professor Pan. Another round of applause for him, please. Now we're starting with today's first presentation, and we do have a very special first speaker of the day on the topic of future of cat insurance expansion and Asian story. Our next speaker is the Professor Emeritus of Stanford University and Chairman of the International Advisory Board, ICRM. And if you can, put your hands together for the loudest applause for Professor Harish Shah. Professor Shah. And finally, happy forever 28th birthday. That is it.
Good morning, Professor Pan, Professor Loh, faculty and students of ICRM, friends, ladies and gentlemen. It's such a pleasure to be here. As you know, we have come a long way from 2010, from the founding of ICRM. And a lot of wonderful things are still to come. Today I'm going to talk about something at my age is permitted. As you get older and look back at what has been going on, and then you ask yourself why certain things are present today which could have been solved or at least mitigated. And I'm going to talk to you today, maybe blame some of you or all of you, blame our industry, but blaming itself doesn't help. We need to learn from what has been going on and where we need to go and what we need to do to correct it. So my talk is more on looking back, learning from it, and going into the future. I find the title of the theme of the 9th Symposium very interesting. The protection gap. The gaps and the protection gap doesn't occur because the government says so. Doesn't occur because the people say we don't like insurance. Doesn't occur because there is no opportunity. Doesn't occur because there are marvelous products, but nobody wants to use them. Or because nobody can afford the products that we sell. It occurs due to lack of imagination. It occurs due to lack of understanding. It occurs due to taking what we have learned in the advanced economies of North America, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and trying to force fit what we have learned into a region which is totally socially, culturally, politically, economically different. So, protection gap, if it did not occur, I would be shocked. I've been in the United States now for more than 60 years. So even though I look like an Indian, I lived there all my life. I don't know what my colleagues in this part of the world think in terms of insurance as a mitigation measure for risk. You must remember that insurance and resilience are cousins. They're related. Many of you don't think about this in your day-to-day busyness of business, but resilience is what drives societies to find or not to find solutions to their catastrophe risk problems. Poor economies, countries in Asia, are much more resilient to disasters than countries in Europe or North America. If in North America the light goes out 1 hour, it is a national headline for a week. All kinds of things happen. Cities have people looting in the downtown, more babies are born, all kinds of things happen. Here in Asia, most Asia, a light goes out for an hour, it's no big deal. It's part of daily life. In Asia, people travel at 60 miles an hour on top of the train. That you would never imagine doing it in the West. Resilience, when earthquake occurs, like it did a couple of days ago, people rebound back, no matter how miserable they feel, no matter miserable their life is, but one more misery amongst all the things that are going on. And when people are resilient, insurance and paying for that risk transfer is not fundamentally as attractive. And there are many papers written psychologically on this. I don't have to go into it. I have only a few minutes. So, communities that are very resilient don't see insurance as a major solution to their future problems. That's one of the reasons. I'm only going to talk about social issues. There are issues such as affordability, the economic issue. There are issues regarding the education of risk transfer options. But let's keep that on one side. Only on the social side, with the cost and the government involvement, the products we develop in the West are not relevant. So the protection gap is because what you're trying to sell, taken lock, stock, and barrel from the West, you're selling to the wrong market. How many of you have developed fundamentally a product of Asia, for Asia, in Asia? How many of you have taken into account the socio-economic, political, and governmental involvement into developing your product? Understanding hazard, understanding the trigger is universal everywhere. But taking that trigger, taking that hazard, and putting it in such a form that people say, you know, this is something with some help from the government will help me. How many products are there out there? don't tell me microinsurance. That is not sustainable. Microinsurance depends on philanthropy, depends a lot on non-profit organizations doing a lot of work for a smaller community. The principle of insurance, which is universal, larger sample, risk distributed spatially and over many people, is not valid in microinsurance in little areas here and there. So we do not have a good product. And you know who I blame? And here it goes. Pardon me, those who are in Singapore doing reinsurance business. 2 weeks ago, I was in Zurich, and I had dinner with the chief risk officer of Swiss Re and the CEO for Switzerland of Generali. And I had the most fascinating, I even forget what I ate, but the discussions were fascinating. And the discussions were on the following. They said that we have lots of people all over Asia, highly paid, well respected, and they do not take themselves a risk. And with passion come and tell us, we need this and not what that. What you are telling us to sell is not what we need. We need totally different things. How many of the CEOs here fight with the headquarters and tell them what they are trying to grow the business with is not the kind of things that is going to grow business in this part of the world. And this, I did not say, your bosses in Europe tell me. So, I believe that let a small penetration, a penetration gap, did not occur because God doesn't want it. It occurred because we are part of the problem. We are not innovative. Innovation doesn't mean that you take a product, tweak a little bit here and there, and expect that it will fit in a square bag in a round hole. It doesn't do it. I have personal experience for the last 15 years. Initially, as a chairman of RMS, later on as a chairman of RMS India, and later on with smaller startups. I have tried to take what we have developed over the years. I've been in this business now for 58 years. Over the years, we have taken what we have learned in that part of the world and come here, and we have been an incredible failure. You will always get clients, but the protection gap, I can take a bet. 10 years from now, the protection gap, if you look at the gross collected premium divided by GDP, it will get less because the GDP is growing faster. The denominator is growing faster than the numerator. So if you believe that just because you are doing business and the business is good and you are selling your products, that is for larger assets, and the government and the large companies and multinational corporations, they are going to buy it. But if you believe that you are going to change the protection gap in the right direction, you are in a dream world. It won't happen. I was just looking a few days ago, the difference in 2010 when we founded this organization, and last year, 2017, the gap has increased. With all the knowledge we have, with all the fancy stuff we have, with all the technology we have, with all the manpower we have, man and woman power we have, why is the protection gap increasing? Is it because Asia doesn't like to protect themselves? No, they like to protect themselves. Poor people get hurt more after every disaster in terms of their relative wealth. They are already poor, and when the disaster comes, they are wiped out. So they do need protection. But not with the products you guys are selling. Not with the products we have developed over the years. Not with government left out of the equation. So I am not surprised that there is a protection gap. We talk about it, we write about it, but we don't address the right issue, and that is, problem is lack of innovation. How much innovation universities have developed in this part of the world to change that protection gap? Nothing. Nothing. There is not one paper, China, India, Singapore, Indonesia, where truly innovative products are available. Forget about the business, even the university, where innovation should be the name of the game. What has come? They all want to work on the products that are available from the West, tweak them, improve the science behind it, improve the technology behind it. Hello? That's not how you change the world. I recall in the 80s, when I started doing the loss estimation models and working with the insurance, the Solomon brothers and Aetna, they were my first teachers teaching me insurance. They were frustrated. They said, we have no new product, and hence we don't like to sell insurance, especially earthquake insurance and hurricane insurance. So we worked with them, and we developed a whole field of loss estimation and insurance models. Young people do not know, but before 85, to get catastrophe insurance in California was not easy, because they didn't know how to price it. They didn't know how to price hurricane risk. So these kind of products were not available. Now everyone thinks that it has been always there. So we looked through the university, Stanford, to find a product which was lousy commercially, but it had fundamental things in it that the commercial companies took and perfected. There's nothing like that happening in the universities that I know, including in Japan and China. When you are as old as I am, you know all the university landscape. You know all of them, who is doing what. Not much. And hence, the protection gap is going to stay. It's not going to change. If it changes, it will get worse. Unless there's true innovation. Innovation for Asia, in Asia, by people who think Asian. And if that doesn't happen, we'll be talking I won't be around, but 20 years from now, we'll be talking about how come the protection gap is increasing. Unless the government comes and makes it mandatory, and they pay all these insurance premium, which is happening in some parts of the world for some products. But that's not innovation. That's just taking taxpayers' money and distributing it in a different way. With that, I'm going to stop. I wish all of you good luck. Have a good discussion. But please remember, we are part of the problem. Because without innovation, there is no change, or a fundamental change. Don't look at the West to solve the problem of Asia. Don't look at Europeans to solve the problem of Don't look at Americans or Australians or New Zealanders, or for that matter, Chinese or the Japanese. Because in China, the economy is quite different. The government can come and say, everybody is insured. They can do it. In some small regions, they are trying it already. But that's not insurance. That's something else. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Shah. Like to request Prof. Shah to join on stage. And because we have prepared we've prepared a special token of appreciation to Prof. Shah and to present Professor Han. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for them, please. Now this token is special, not just to thank Prof. Shah for his presentation, but for all his years of involvement and contribution to the establishment and success of ICRM. Thank you so much. Gentlemen, please be seated. Thank you so much. Our next speaker has an interest in contributing towards making Singapore a center of excellence for catastrophe reinsurance and is a member of the International Advisory Board of ICRM. And to share with us on the topic of closing the protection gap, what would success look like? Former CEO of Aon Benfield Asia Pacific, please help me welcome Mr. Malcolm Steinberg. Mr. Steinberg?
Professor Shah, Professor Pan, fellow members of the Advisory Board and delegates, thank you for the opportunity for me to give you some of my thoughts. Firstly, Professor Shah and I did not collaborate when we put our papers together, and I might as well not give my paper because you've done it all for me, thank you. And also, I hope you consider me an honorary Asian, because actually I'm technically an African, so I hope that I'm qualified to have some insight into this part of the world and the issues that prevail in terms of the protection gap. None of this counts in my time for my speech, by the way. I need every minute I've got. But having said that, I was thinking about the protection gap again this morning, and I was thinking it's very, very similar to the issue of food shortage and poverty. There's more than enough to go around, but unfortunately there's issues of distribution and bureaucracy that tend to get in the way. The one thing about being in a non-executive position, you can say what you like, with hopefully very little consequences. So today I can talk from the heart rather than from the head. And on that point, I'm not going to bag the insurance or reinsurance industry. It's been a wonderful industry for me and given me the ability to give my children the clothes and food and education that they demand. But I've got to say the point that Professor Shah made about innovation. I spent the last 40 years trying to increase the insurance pool. I successfully grew every company that I was responsible for, but I never increased the pool. And I suddenly realized that doing the same thing and expecting a different result is sheer madness. And I think that's basically where the industry is today and why we have this insurance gap. I'm just getting to the more formal part. You can start counting now. The purpose of my speech is to really, I want to stimulate discussion on the protection gap and to question the value of using the term itself. Is this a term we should be using, the protection gap? And I'd like to open with a question: whether the term protection gap is an invention by insurers and reinsurers, a real fiction by insurers and reinsurers, born out of the frustration of not being able to grow the global insurance pool with increased insurance penetration. So is it a term that's just been invented by sheer frustration? and particularly trying to grow that pool in developing economies. In my view, there's a danger in focusing on the term protection gap and detracts from the main objective ought to be. In order to understand what success looks like, we really need a common understanding as to what the protection gap is. And I suggest seeing it in terms of adequate insurance penetration rates is insufficient and really detracts from the broader picture. The issue of the protection gap, in my view, is also subjective and difficult to quantify. In fact, I suggest that quantification of success should not be limited to simplistic analysis of insurance penetration rates. Notwithstanding my comments, the insurance protection gap is, of course, still a significant factor in determining what success looks like, but it, however, is not the only factor. The Geneva Association defines the insurance gap as the difference in the amount of insurance that is economically beneficial and the amount of coverage actually purchased. So why do individuals, businesses, and indeed countries buy less insurance than is economically beneficial? The Geneva Association points to gaps in both supply and demand side. On the demand side, there are issues of awareness, education, affordability, financial literacy, policyholder trust, weak legality and legal systems, behavioural, cultural and social factors. And that was borne out in Professor Sharp's paper. On the supply side, there's negative impact of transaction costs, imperfect or symmetric information, moral hazard, inability to quantify potential scale of losses, legal and regulatory environment, and uninsurable risk. Addressing these issues certainly will lead us to some partial success. There's also a common misperception that the protection gap is an emerging economies issue. The assumption being that highly developed economies have sophisticated insurance and reinsurance markets and also financial and human resources to enable recovery from catastrophes within acceptable timeframes. The experience following Hurricane Katrina in the USA and the Greater Hoku earthquake in eastern Japan suggests otherwise. For example, I witnessed people still living in temporary housing in Fukushima in 2017. That was 6 years after the Great Eastern Japan earthquake of March 11, 2011. I have to say, though, that temporary housing was exemplary. It was really fantastic. But it was still temporary housing. And by the way, the one thing that had not been addressed was the psychological impact of not only the earthquake and the tsunami, but also the fallout of the nuclear fallout, the psychological impact on the people that is having ramifications still today and will continue long into the future. So, also the assumption that highly developed economies have high levels of insurance penetration rates is incorrect. There's a protection gap that exists in Western economies too, Professor Shaw. I believe that anyway. And only 20% of economic losses are covered by the Great Eastern Japanese earthquake of March 11, 2012. Following the Northridge earthquake in 1994, many householders dropped coverage altogether. No one bought earthquake insurance. The take-up of earthquake cover is arguably one of the most developed economies in the world is still only around 12%, notwithstanding the 2014 South Napa earthquake. The unintended consequence of that is that following an earthquake, mortgage lenders' collateral for their risk is rendered totally worthless. So what does success look like in this context? I suggest that success is a highly developed state of resilience rather than a high rate of insurance penetration per se. Success should be measured by how quickly a society is able to recover and indeed prosper from its pre-disaster state. Success should also be seen from the perspective of the unfortunate victims of natural catastrophes. They should be the people who define what success is. A study of the New Zealand experience following the Canterbury earthquake of 2010 and 2011 juxtaposed the devastating earthquakes of 26 and 12th of May 2015 in Nepal is instructive of what needs to be done to close the protection gap and achieve a level of resilience that fits within my definition of success. Each natural catastrophe throws up a substantial body of learning, and the challenge is to apply this body of knowledge towards increasing resilience in both developing and developed countries. I question how effectively this has been done, and perhaps success is translating this body of knowledge into increased resilience against future natural disasters. On the 26th of April and the 12th of May 2015, 9,000 people were killed and 500,000 people from the central region of Nepal lost their homes. Relief and rescue operations were immediately undertaken with both local and international aid workers, but shortly after, recovery operations slowed to a crawl. 2 years after the devastating earthquake in Nepal, 70% of people affected are still living in temporary shelter. And it is common to see damaged houses, temples without roofs, earthquake debris, even in the capital, Kathmandu. The government continued to marginalise earthquake victims, and according to Amnesty International, these survivors are still languishing in shelters made out of iron sheets and tarpaulins. The state of affairs exists despite $4 billion pledged to the National Reconstruction Authority. This is a stark example that success cannot be measured by the availability only of funds for reconstruction. So what were the issues in Nepal? What can we learn from that? Political squabbling is primarily a factor contributing to the state of inertia. The National Reconstruction Authority was set up to oversee the rebuilding of Nepal. Despite pressure from international donors and humanitarian agencies, protracted political wrangling resulted in a 9-month delay in appointing a chief executive to the lead authority. And there have been 3 chief executives since the first was appointed, and that was within a year. As a consequence, very little of the $4 billion pledged has found its way to the work of rebuilding fewer than 10% of the 500,000 homes destroyed that have been rebuilt by the support of the government and donors. This state of affairs arose in an environment where there was ongoing constitutional debate, and the disaster response is sidelined by protracted political instability characterized by constitutional transition, ideological and ethnic tension, and frequent changes of government. The state of affairs was exacerbated by complete absence of local government, and there has been no elections or effective local government for 16 years. And the loss of political accountability to local people is one of the key factors of the fracture of the recovery of Nepal. Unaffected local elites have, for example, been included in the list of victims receiving financial support. And without democratic or local leadership, people are unable to voice their concerns or mobilize the community resources to implement the recovery. Despite this, and this is my key point, and the point I really want to make out of this example, is that despite this, Nepalese enjoy a strong local social capital that has helped them in times of distress and difficulty. Community leaders within Gorkha claim we work together at a community level to rebuild damaged houses one by one, even when there is no support from the government and donors. And there is, particularly in developing countries like Nepal, no substitute for strong local institutions. And let these people take charge of that. And this resonates with earlier words of Professor Shah about resilience and people getting on with it. So really, that is an example. And I hate to focus on Nepal, but it really is a stark example. On the one hand, there's some resilience. On the other hand, how the protection gap is failing the victims of that terrible earthquake. Now, a juxtaposition of the Nepalese experience with the Canterbury, New Zealand earthquake of 2010 and 2011 highlights that the issues facing Nepal are not limited to developing economies. And even stable democracies are not as resilient as they first appear to be. The Canterbury earthquake, economic loss of $30 billion, equated to more than 20% of the New Zealand GDP. The insurance penetration for the disaster was in the region of 80%. Not much of a protection gap there in terms of money. By way of comparison, the insured penetration rate for Tohoku and Sendai earthquake, for example, was 4%. The New Zealand economy is a fraction of the Japanese economy, and the Canterbury earthquake experience shows that size of the economy is not a precondition to successfully closing the protection gap. And while direct comparisons are perhaps too simplistic, they do bear some thinking about. Following government and mass media reports, one gains the perception of a high level of resilience to a major natural catastrophe in New Zealand. This is largely attributable to the work of an independent entity specifically set up to reduce the impact of natural disasters in a country. The Earthquake and War Damage Commission was already set up in the 1940s, showing far-sighted approach to dealing with the potential natural disasters. A key feature of the scheme is the ability of the Commission to impose mandatory, and that is the key of success here, mandatory natural disaster cover, thereby ensuring a high level of insurance penetration for residential insurance. New Zealand has a very high level of take-up, and second only to the Netherlands. By the time of the earthquakes, the EQC had built up a fund of about $6 billion and had purchased, in addition to that $6 billion, a further $6 billion of earthquake cover. So already $12 billion for the loss was available. A risk transfer process must include analysis, associated trade-offs, including costs, benefits, and who pays and when. The EQC oversees a detailed, integrated risk management strategy that is supported by high-quality data and modeling capability. While no single group can address every aspect of hazard risk management, the apparent success of response to the Canterbury earthquake, and I say apparent, demonstrated the significant advantage of having an independent entity with oversight of the system components. The key is the ability to support targeted interaction across institutional bounds. I won't go on more and more about how successful the New Zealand example is, because what is little known is that notwithstanding the apparent high level of success and resilience portrayed by the New Zealand government, the success or otherwise of its recovery from crisis must be found by the perception of its stakeholders. The 2016 survey demonstrated a significant gap between the New Zealand government's perception and the perception of the residents of Christchurch. 80% of respondents gave a negative view of the earthquake recovery process. And there are a variety of models used to depict recovery phases following significant disaster. The Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority took the United Nations model and adapted it to the New Zealand experience of the earthquake sequences in Canterbury. The 4 phases are emergency, restoration, reconstruction, and vision. In April 2015, the Ministry of Canterbury Earthquake Recovery identified that the recovery process was shifting from restoration of essential emergency services into reconstruction phase, an achievement of the long-term vision for the Greater Christchurch. He noted this would continue for at least the next 10 years. So still a lot of work to be done in New Zealand, notwithstanding what people read in the media. A very long list of problems and issues were identified for the responses, some of which affect the core values and function of society. I'll move to my conclusion in relation to, in the interest of time. And my conclusion is this, that our focus should be on increased resilience rather than on the narrow perspective of the protection gap. And that is purely looking at insurance penetration rates. We're seeing that adequate financing of the recovery process is a critical, but not singular success factor. There is substantial challenge for insurers and reinsurers and capital markets to increase penetration of financing for the recovery process. Management of recovery process and accountability must be at a local and grassroots level to be successful. And now comes the advertisement. I suggest there is greater role for institutes like the Institute of Catastrophe Management to play in working with similar institutes across the globe to develop more effective processes for the recovery of natural catastrophes. A key starting point is the collation and all knowledge and experience gained from previous natural disasters for practical application to manage future catastrophes. I don't believe that's being done to any great extent. And this goes beyond the collection of data and modeling. Satisfaction or measurement of the level of resilience must be seen from the perspective of those impacted, rather than government and for those institutions charged with the authority to finance and oversee the recovery process. It is not us, but the victims of the protection gap who ought to determine our success next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sandro. Thank you so much. Now, following our next speaker, we'll be breaking for tea. And just a note once again, if you do have any questions for any of our speakers, please write it down because we'll be taking questions during our panel discussions later on. Now, our next speaker is also a member of the International Advisory Board of ICRM, and his topic today, Ensuring Asian Resilience. Please help me welcome CBE, Head of Capital Science and Policy Practice, Willis Towers Watson, Mr. Rowan Douglas. Mr. Douglas, stage is yours.
That's all. Thank you very much. Well, good morning, everybody. CC, thank you very much for the invitation to come back. I know we've got a coffee break in about 10 minutes, so I'll try and keep it down to 10 minutes or so. And I've still got my red book from last year, CC. This is the notebook from last year's program. Because it's red, I haven't lost it yet. I saved my very important notes, so what am I doing wrong? Not too far away. I'll get closer. There we go. Well, I'm very cross actually because Edmund was very probably pressing me for an abstract of what I was going to say today, and I hadn't quite decided what I was going to say. And then I get to breakfast, I've worked out what I'm going to say, and then listening to Malcolm and Harish, I've decided to change what I was going to say, or at least change the order. So in 8 minutes, I'll try and cover it. The theme basically is the opportunity that I think Singapore has in this space in the next 2 years. It's a very special 2 years in this agenda. And there's a number of events happening here in Singapore in the next 2 years, which could be not just a local transmission system for global change, but actually I think have regional or even global impact. So I'm going to slightly have a different tack to what Harish said and bring it back to something that Malcolm said in the example of New Zealand. Because there were about 5 years ago, there were a bunch of us sitting around the room. I think Francis might have been there. It was in Washington, D.C. And it was in the wake of the Haiyan disaster in the Philippines. And despite everyone's best efforts, insurance penetration had been as high as we wanted in the Philippines, and despite everyone's best efforts, we weren't getting as much practical application after the event as we wanted. And some of us got together, and the brutal truth was we realised that you could have as much innovation as you wanted in risk transfer instruments, and fundamentally the world obeys the laws of physics. I know there are cultural differences, but physics is basically the same. The laws of economics are basically the same. Yes, there are cultural transmission systems that need to be respected, local institutions that need to be worked with, but this is, by its nature, a pretty globally consistent challenge. But the brutal truth is that the innovation isn't needed so much in the technical side of what we're doing. The innovation is required in the social science and the public policy side of what we're doing, because where I come from in the United Kingdom, almost all insurance is bought, including the stuff I buy, because I have to. It's because governments and regulators have decided that for whatever reason, I must buy insurance. Usually because of the damage I can do to other people, either by hurting them and I have to buy liability insurance, or I borrow money and people require me to be insured. And so public policy and the compulsion to buy insurance, or the encouragement to buy insurance, or the disincentive not to buy insurance, is absolutely fundamental to the consumption of insurance and related resilience protections. And we saw in New Zealand that was the reason why there's such coverage in New Zealand, because the government mandated that it had to be bought, because the government known the risk wanted to share it. But actually around the world and in the UK, the government doesn't provide any insurance, it's all provided through competitive markets. I know each country is different, the US margins of the same need. So the understanding that insurance is not just a financial instrument, it's an institution of society, and actually all insurance, even the private sector stuff, is a public-private partnership, is absolutely fundamental. So we're not actually going to make the changes in this region or around the world we need for resilience, of which insurance is a critical input, until we have a change in public policy and the understanding of social contracts and the duties of care or fiduciary duties. And it was that realization that led some of us to decide that what was needed was a new connection between the industry and insurance expertise and governments and international institutions. That led to the creation of a group called the Insurance Development Forum. And every year I'm asked to come here and update on the idea, because it has this good meeting about a month before this meeting, and we were all gathered in Berlin literally a month ago, about 400 people of this group, which is co-chaired by the industry, new chair coming in, Jenny DeVerne, chair of the AXA Group, co-chaired by Joachim Levy of the World Bank, and Akim Steiner of the UNDP. And I'm pleased to say that group has developed some considerable momentum now. We have a steering group of really industry heavyweights. The governance has been confirmed. The IS with the Secretariat, the basis of operation in London. The Secretary has been selected. Hopefully her appointment will be announced soon once some contractual completion is undertaken. And I think it's creating absolutely the practical gearbox whereby these public policy issues, as well as practical programs, as the work we've done already in Sri Lanka and hopefully in Indonesia Indonesia and the Philippines shortly, that really this practical connection can be had. And I've certainly seen it myself. I remember about 3 months ago, lucky enough to be here in Singapore, invitation MAS, to talk to the 10 ASEAN finance ministers on exactly this issue. The meeting was scheduled for about half an hour, and I think we were all speaking for about 1 hour, 20 minutes. I have no doubt that the finance ministers are absolutely focused on this protection gap, resilience deficit, under-insurance issue. The question is how they proceed. So, important regarding the Insurance Development Forum, and I want to just pick up on that. Next year, its meeting will be here in Singapore. So there'll be about 500 people coming to Singapore in June, about a month before next year's ICRR meeting, for I think quite a pivotal meeting. The following year, as many of you know, the World Bank will be having its understanding risk meeting led by Francis Kessier, who will be speaking later on this morning. And those 3 meetings, or 4 if you include the second ICRR meeting, are very important pivot for, I think, a convergence that needs to happen here and more widely. So there's the IDF update, if I may. The IS will also have an office here in Singapore by the end of the year, I think, which will have an IDF component. Constant time, so I'm going to try and pull this together in 3 or 4 minutes. I absolutely also think in this region, the pace of movement regarding resilience deficit protection. I mentioned the ASEAN finance ministers meeting. One could talk about similar meetings at APEC. There's lots of work being done at the ADB, at the UN, Asian Regional Group, UNESCAP, produced just recently a significant report on this. There's very exciting programs happening in the Econ region, the Seadrift program, ADB, and others. In fact, I would say that there is a blossoming of initiatives at the sovereign, multi-sovereign, sovereign, sub-sovereign level about how governments begin to protect themselves against these risks and propagate that protection through to exposed populations and sectors at either a But to pick up perhaps the point that Haresh was emphasizing, and TC almost hinted at the beginning, let's not kid ourselves. This is really a drop in the ocean. The level of protection and resilience through insurance-related instruments in this region, as it is around the world, is really very, very small and is likely to get smaller, proportionate to wealth. This is a credible failing of, yes, our industry and imagination, but also public policy. It's going to lead to some significant problems. But I'm going to come back to my original point that the challenge isn't really supply, and the challenge I don't think is fundamentally about insurance innovation. I think it's about public policy. And I'm afraid that if we continue to focus on this theme within our comfort zone of catastrophe risk management, or reinsurance, or insurance itself, we won't actually capture the imagination of a much wider and more significant and more powerful set of forces. So this is perhaps the final point I'd like to make. One other area that many of us in the room, I'm sure, have been quite involved with is the mainstream climate agenda that's been gaining considerable momentum over the last 10 or 15 years, and certainly the last 3 or 4 years since 2015, since Paris and since the related agreements. Until now, the climate agenda, and people focused on that because obviously ultimately it is an existential issue for humanity. That agenda is being driven by sustainability-related communities focused on energy use and mitigation and keeping global warming down to 2 degrees or less. And that focus on energy use will be continued. But there is a much more significant emphasis now emerging, will come through in the next year or so, around resilience and adaptation. And certainly the events of last year and what we've seen this year, and particularly this summer, is only going to emphasize a growing focus on the climate agenda, which I must say is probably 100 times more politically influential than the disaster risk agenda and the disaster risk policy community. The resilience agenda is going to really begin to come through. And what concerns me about that community up till now is they genuinely think, broadly speaking, that you measure physical climate risk by counting carbon emissions. But actually there's a whole industry of understanding about hazard exposure, vulnerability and loss that we're going to really understand how countries, cities, companies, individuals are exposed to physical climate risk. It's exactly the expertise that's in this room and represented by this community that has to be adopted far more broadly. So my plea is perhaps the forces that come together here in Singapore are those that need to create this intellectual fusion between this risk community and its related financial components, and a much wider climate and finance community that desperately needs our skills to encode climate risk, which of course is the most significant aspect of natural hazard risk, probably 80% of the risk, climate risk into mainstream credit risk and related financial features. Now I think that this conference here, coupled with the wider understanding risk agenda that is going to be coming to this region in the next 2 years, coupled with the growing role of the MAS in the international green finance agenda, particularly the network for green and financial system, is absolutely the combination of forces which will allow climate and natural hazard risk to enter mainstream financial risk management. And if we can achieve that, it will then create the requirements to get risk understood and capital and legal duties to protect against this risk. And until that switch is flipped, until other departments at NTU and NUS and economics this institute to that wider role that I think it can have in forming a much broader space than even the community that we bring together every year.
Thank you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we certainly have more insightful information to share with you throughout the day. But for now, we'll go for a 30 minutes tea break. And we certainly hope to see you back here in 30 minutes. Please enjoy your refreshment. It's just right outside the hall. Thank you very much.